Alright, welcome to the Life of Learning podcast. I'm Justus Frank, and as I pointed out in my last podcast, there's a real, a passion within me to through what I'm doing is to address the dehumanization of children. And I sort of stated quite a few ways in which we dehumanize children, and in that podcast, I ended up with the ultimate way that we do dehumanize children, where we say, you haven't reached full personhood as of yet, or humanhood. Again, people like to play around with these terms, and you can see my presentations on language and the way that we kind of use language. But basically, that children haven't reached that state of personhood or humanhood, and therefore we can treat them differently. And this is the way that we have dehumanized other people in the past, is basically to say, they haven't reached a state, maybe evolutionary speaking or whatever, they haven't reached that state of the same type of person that we are, and this gives people feel that they have the right then to act towards these people that they find somewhat subhuman at some level, in a variety of ways, often violent ways. And as I made the point there, one of these ways is abortion, and so I want to try and address this. I think it's a really, really important thing to discuss. And the reason why this came up for me is just the other day I was just flicking through YouTube, as I sometimes do, probably too often. But I saw that that streaming live, there was a live show by the Atheist Experience, and the Atheist Experience is a very interesting show, and in terms of often people of variety of religions will ring up and talk to the atheists, and they will have various discussions, and it's quite an interesting show. But anyway, in this show, there was the topic of abortion came up in terms of the morality of it and things like that. And one of the main hosts of this show is a guy by the name of Matt Dillahunty. And, Matt Dillahunty he is very good as such at reasoning, and he's an experienced debater and all these sorts of things. And some of the arguments he makes about variety of different topics, again, they do seem to be quite well thought out. So, and exactly, his arguments regarding abortion do seem to be well thought out to a point. And but I noticed something about his arguments, and the fact that they were very, very similar to a discussion that I had with a friend a while ago regarding abortion. And I realized that this was kind of, this line of argument that Matt Dillahunty was using is kind of seems to be the most prevalent and the most the main argument that seems to be out there for people who accept that abortion should be a thing, and that it is a fine thing to do. There's nothing wrong with having an abortion. Exactly, and I said that quite particular because exactly Matt Dillahunty, people like that, they won't say that it's that abortion is moral necessarily, but they also won't say that it is immoral. So what I want to do in this session is basically to try and strongman, first and foremost, the argument. I want to, I guess, and this is something that will be quite interesting for me doing this, to basically give a position of Matt Dillahunty and a variety of of people like that who have various arguments that abortion isn't wrong, and that is not wrong to have an abortion. So I basically, instead of straw manning the arguments exactly, which is where you make the arguments look farcical, I hope to really, state it the way that other people have stated these arguments, and put them basically in their best light. And then what I hope to do after that is to show you what I sort of think about some of those arguments, and so what my responses have kind of been in the past. And also I ended up looking at another debate between Matt Dillahunty and a lady called Christine, and I basically picked a few things out of that debate as well. So I'll bring that into various parts as well. So here we go. So here's my attempt at strongmanning the argument that there is nothing wrong with a woman having an abortion. So the main argument that women should be able to have the right to have an abortion is that it's all about bodily autonomy. So the bodily autonomy argument is basically all that matters. No one has a right to use somebody else's body without their consent. So for instance, an example of this is that you cannot require me to give a kidney to you just because you need it. And just because you might need a kidney, it doesn't give you any right to say, well, you have to give me that kidney because I need it. And so in the same way, people are saying that, regarding the mother and the fetus within her, that simply because the fetus is basically saying, I need you to survive, and I need your blood supply, I need the nutrition that's coming from you, I need the oxygen from you, just because the fetus in a sense is demanding that from the mother, doesn't mean that the mother has to give that. The fetus basically doesn't have the right to use the mother's body without the mother's consent. And this argument is basically more framed in terms of the legality of it. Should we be forcing women, and should we be punishing women if they go through with an abortion? An analogy is kind of drawn there. You should not be legally compelled to run into a burning building to rescue someone. So while the focus is more on in terms of the legality of it, there is also the point that, as a rule, that someone else doesn't have a right to use your body without your consent. And the thing is that having a baby is not just a matter of gestation and then, popping the thing out. It brings about, it's a very serious thing, because having a baby and carrying it to full term, it can change your life, it can be dangerous, it can, it can result in death to the mother. Having a C-section is a major operation, it's a major surgery. And so the point of being able to have an abortion is that the woman should have the right to remove themselves from that situation, to remove themselves from that dangerous situation. And if a woman didn't have the right to remove herself from the fetus, then in fact you seem to be granting the fetus not just human rights, but special rights. You're giving the fetus more rights than you are the woman, because you're not allowing her to go away from the situation. You are demanding that she stays in the situation that she doesn't want to stay in. And so basically the fetus's rights are trumping the woman's rights. And the point here is that the fetus is a foreign invader inside the woman, and to give that foreign invader special rights above the woman would be to basically denigrate women in some respect, and that we are valuing the rights of the fetus above the rights of a living and breathing woman. So basically, even if we were to grant that the fetus is a human being, the fact that there are two human beings involved means that there might be a conflict in terms of rights, and the argument is that we don't have the right to force a woman to be pregnant. And in fact, that when a woman chooses an abortion, when they're terminating a life, it's an act of taking responsibility for the condition that they've found themselves in. That in fact abortion is an empowering position because it allows the woman to take maximum responsibility whether or not they want to take the child to term or not. So in fact it's empowering women, and it's giving them more responsibility rather than them avoiding responsibility. And Matt Dillahunty in particular, he puts forward the example of a kidney. So he puts forward this scenario. So someday someone has a kid with a kidney condition that requires a kidney transplant to save their life. And when the parents procreated, they knew there was a non-zero chance of the child getting that kidney disease. Should the parents be legally required to donate one of their kidneys? The question is not about whether they should donate. The morality aspect is not what is being questioned here. Instead, the question is, should the government impose on them that they have to donate one of their kidneys? And basically that there's the rights of more than one individual to consider. You know, in this situation, there is a powerful burden to overcome before you can start imposing on someone else's rights. If we're going to do that, we don't just err on the side of caution. We better have a really good reason for doing so. And it's not good enough to impose our moral opinion on someone as a matter of law. So those are the sort of main arguments, and I'll just add on a little bit more regarding that. In my discussion with this friend a few months ago regarding abortion, they also said that consent to have sex isn't consent to becoming pregnant. Becoming pregnant, even with consent, is not consent to remain pregnant. A woman has the right to withdraw her consent at any time. And the fact that motherhood is something that affects you for a lifetime, it seems absurd that a person's entire life should be changed because of an unintended pregnancy when we have the medical ability to actually intervene into this. You know, there's things that could change in the mother's environment. The father might leave her, or all sorts of things like that. And the fact that she's being forced to carry this child to term seems like a harsh position to take. When it comes to a mother and the fetus, it is basically a zero-sum game. We should take the rights of a citizen who is undoubtedly a living thing to take priority over the fetus. So there we go, those are the arguments, and I want to just, if you are, I guess what's called pro-choice, if you are okay with abortions, just want you to think, you know, have I stated the argument well? Have I made a good job of stating the argument? Do you think I've been unfair in any way that I've presented it? Have I presented the best case in terms of this? And you know, that was kind of my intent, is that I've tried to present it as coherently and to the best of my ability, and from what I've been able to hear about how others have presented this case. So, you know, in terms of that, let me know if you think that I've presented the case really well. So let's go through some of these arguments now and just see what we think. So the main argument is from bodily autonomy, that no one has the right to use someone else's body without their consent. And the thing is that I think I absolutely agree with this. I have no problem with that statement whatsoever. I think consent is the key thing, and no one should be able to force another person to do something. And for me, exactly, I know that people who are pro-choice, they tend to focus more on the legality of it. While, yeah, I don't, in a sense, I don't really care about the legality of it. Just because something is legal or illegal doesn't make it right or wrong. Do I think that, would I personally throw someone in prison because they aborted someone? Nope. But do I think it's wrong, and will I quite plainly state that it is wrong? Yes, I will. And exactly, in terms of legality, my whole views on politics, I'm not going to get into all of those now, but basically my position is no. I don't really care about the legality of it, whether it's legal or illegal. For me, the big thing is whether we are okay with someone else aborting a baby. So, is a baby using the mother's body without consent? And again, I would say yes, the fetus certainly is using the mother's body in terms of that, but I wouldn't say that it's without consent. And this is the key thing to the whole argument, is that it seems that the mother has given consent. Now there's one situation where obviously that isn't the case. In terms of being raped, yes, the mother doesn't have consent, and that's one special circumstance that I'm willing to sort of discuss further. But in all other situations, the mother has consented to at least having sex. And in terms of, now the argument is that, well, having sex isn't the same as consenting to be pregnant. And there's the thing, sex, when it occurs, there are consequences from those actions. If you are going to engage in an activity such as sex, unless you are completely unaware, you know that could result in pregnancy. And even the use of condoms and other sort of birth control measures doesn't necessarily, they're not 100% effective. And so the fact is that, yes, engaging in sex with someone could result in a pregnancy. And in having sex with someone, you are consenting to that possibility. There's the same thing in the debate that I watched. The lady brought up the fact that if you are playing baseball in your backyard, yes, you didn't mean to maybe break the neighbour's window, but that doesn't really play into it. The fact that you decided to play baseball means that you are responsible for the actions the consequences that might result of doing that. And one of the consequences that might happen from playing baseball in your backyard is that you might fire a baseball through your neighbour's window. And so, in a sense, people have consented when they have sex that there is a possibility to become pregnant. At the end of the day, responsibility, real responsibility, is in fact being responsible for your actions and the consequences of your actions. And that's why it's so important. And yes, this is the mindset that we've got into in our modern society, is that we do have a lot more birth control methods. And so because we have more of these birth control methods, we basically don't take as much responsibility as to who we end up sleeping with, who we end up having sex with. Because we have so many birth control options, the consequences of something going wrong, it gets lowered, and so we tend to take bigger risks, and we take bigger risks regarding the people that we actually sleep with. And I'm kind of doing this a bit off the cuff, but there are also studies out there regarding things like seatbelts and helmets for cyclists, that in fact people take bigger risks when they perceive that there's certain safety precautions that are put in place. So exactly, if you wear a helmet riding a bicycle, you are probably going to take more risks than if you were riding a bicycle and you didn't have a helmet. In fact, you are more careful when you don't have a helmet. And same with driving a car. You're going to be more careful if you don't wear a seatbelt than if you do wear a seatbelt. That doesn't mean that safety precautions aren't a good idea. It just means that we need to realize that we become more reckless the more safety precautions there are. And this is particularly the case in sex, that people are more reckless with who they have sex with because of these birth control methods that are out there, and that they feel that there isn't as much consequence to their actions, or they can cover up their consequences more easily. And this is a thing that, despite that being the case, despite the fact that you might be wearing a helmet, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ride your bike carefully. Or despite the fact that you are wearing a seatbelt, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't drive your car carefully. And the same thing with sex. Despite you having various protections, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be very careful about who you actually sleep with. Because just as within cars, even though we have certain safety precautions that allow us to drive more faster and more efficient, when those crashes do happen, they can, at high speeds, they can obviously still be incredibly fatal if we push the limits too much. And the fatalities are a lot more deadly as such at higher speeds. And the same thing occurs when we're having sex. That yes, we can take certain precautions, but if we are too reckless, that when the consequences do occur, when we pass that threshold, when the consequences do kick in, those consequences can be a lot more catastrophic than if we never would have had those safety things in the first place. So this is a really important concept about the world and principle about how the world works. And yeah, so I encourage everyone to, and this is for me included as well, we need to really be thinking about who we are actually sleeping with, who are we deciding to have sex with, because sex has real consequences, and if we are too reckless with that, the consequences can be quite devastating. Exactly, we might end up with having a child with someone who then runs away and leaves us, and we have no one to help look after the child with. Or they might be the type of person who leaves us with a child and then ends up being, and while they might be really good in bed, they might also be very violent and end up beating our children. So we need to actually be a lot more careful about who we choose to partner up with. And I think that's a really awesome message for our current generation. There was also the argument that you shouldn't be compelled because the fetus was like a foreign invader coming into your body, and as such, the argument was that abortion is basically a type of self-defense, and this is a common position that people who are okay with abortion take. And the reality is that, again, the fetus didn't actually choose to be there. They didn't choose to be there at all. They didn't attack. They were put there by the two people involved in having sex, and so they didn't have any choice in that matter. So they didn't attack at all. There wasn't any attack whatsoever. They found themselves in this position, and they found themselves in a position where they are completely dependent on the mother, even though, possibly they didn't want to be dependent on this mother. They didn't choose to be that mother. Possibly, if they had the choice of which mother they would like to have, quite possibly the mother that they're in is not the mother that they would like to have. So they have had no choice in this matter whatsoever, and they are simply put in that situation. So in terms of saying that it's an attack by the fetus, and that it is abortion is a version of self-defense, is simply just incorrect. There is no attack by the fetus. And then there's also this argument that abortion is actually empowering. It's an empowering position because instead of the woman negating their responsibilities, they are taking more responsibility, because they are making the choice whether they have now the responsibility, the heavy responsibility of deciding whether or not to take the child to term or not. But again, this doesn't actually seem to follow in terms of, this would be equivalent of saying that because someone has a lot of power, that therefore they are also very responsible. For instance, and okay, this example gets maybe overused a lot, but for instance, take someone like Hitler. He had, you could say, well, he had a lot of responsibility over which people should die and which people should live. And, he was responsible for his actions. And so, the fact that he had a whole lot of responsibility was a really good thing. And it's like, well, no, he just had a lot of power, and he used that power to try and control people and to decide who should live and who should die. So yes, it's an empowering position to hold within your hands, so to speak, the power to either give life or to kill someone. But I don't think it's necessarily that having that power is necessarily a moral or a good thing to have, or something that you should use and as a means of justifying, because you have that power, that therefore that justifies you the ability to be able to kill someone. Exactly, just because Hitler was capable of killing the Jews doesn't mean that he was justified in doing so. And it's interesting, this question regarding consent, from those people who don't find abortion a bad thing. My friend said basically a woman has the right to withdraw her consent at any time up until her baby has legal personhood. And basically my reply to him was this. So I'm just going to read some of this out and see what you think. So consent is only a continual process when the action is continual. Yes, you can stop having sex anytime as it is an action, but if you have sex, you cannot withdraw consent of the effects of sex. The effects of sex are not an action. If you get an STD through sex, you cannot say, I withdraw consent that this STD should be in my body. Once it's there, it has nothing to do with consent. Notice that getting an STD is not a punishment. It is simply a natural consequence of having sex with someone who has an STD. Yes, a person's entire life might change after contracting an STD, but having sex with someone who has an STD is not a crime if done voluntarily. We may say that this is unfair and that it was unintended, but that's not how life works. The truth is that if you consent to having sex with someone carrying an STD, you are also consenting to the effects of that action. As with any action, the point is to take responsibility for our own actions. And this means that you consented to the possibility of contracting the STD. And there are people who do consent to having sex with someone who has an STD, knowing full well that they may get it too. Now, you could complain about it afterwards, but to be honest, you are just being irresponsible. The easiest way to not get an STD is to not have sex with someone who has an STD, and there are numerous ways of ensuring this. Now, I realize at this point you'll probably want to immediately jump to, but they might change their mind and seek medical treatment. We can get to that. But first, is the issue of consent resolved? Can we agree that a woman who chooses to have sex has also consented to the possibility of pregnancy? Now, imagine, for example, your spouse gets injured in your house. You are doing something, and in fact you cause the injury. You get her to bed and call a doctor. The doctor says it is a very severe injury and the patient cannot be moved for the next few months. Let's make it 9 months for an example. If the patient is moved, then they will probably die. The doctor asks if you consent to look after your spouse and care for them. You consent. As time goes on, you realize how inconvenient this arrangement is. You can't work properly, it's not good for your social life, etc. To top it all off, you are feeding them from your own money and they are not contributing to anything. So now you want to withdraw consent to looking after them. However, I think we would agree that you can't just tell them to leave because even if they wanted to, they are incapable of doing so. If the possibility exists, you could ask someone else to look after your spouse. And this is where the idea of possibly transplanting babies comes in, and then obviously after the baby is born, you can put them up for adoption. And we don't really have the medical procedures quite yet to be able to transplant babies fully. So, if those two options aren't possible, what are you going to do? Most people would say that it's rough, but you just have to stick out the 9 months until the person can move, and then you can get a divorce and ask them to leave and all the rest of it. The only other options you have is to try and move the person anyway, but this is guaranteed to kill them, or what you could also do is to kill them directly, which would also solve your problem. And so what is being said is that because you have withdrawn consent from looking after a helpless, independent person, you now have the right to kill them. And that's the moral standard that I find abhorrent. Just because someone is reliant on you for their survival, a fact that was initiated by you, does not give you the right to kill that person. It's not the baby's fault that it is in the womb, nor that it is reliant on the mother, nor that it can't leave. You can transfer responsibility to another willing person, but only if it is safe to do so. And when I gave this example, my friend actually, said no, he agrees that that person, so that person who has their spouse in bed, and would be justified in killing that person. And in fact, they went as far as to say that even if a transfer was possible, that would still not mean that the person wouldn't be able to kill their spouse. So either way, so the person basically has two options. They could either kill their spouse, who has become an inconvenience to them and who is completely dependent on them, or they could seek to transfer the spouse to someone else's responsibility if that were possible. And he did say that one was slightly more moral than the other one, but at the end of the day he wouldn't disagree with either option. So I found that quite frightening, and the conversation kind of went downhill from there, as you can possibly imagine. In the debate between Matt Dillahunty and this lady called Christine, she put forward the example of someone dumping a child on your boat, and pretending, so have this scenario in your mind. Basically, if someone dumped a child on your boat and you were days from shore and they were completely dependent on you, do you have the right to slit their throat and throw them overboard to the sharks because they are dependent on you? And Matt Dillahunty pointed out, no, but I do have the right to call 911 and have someone else take responsibility, and if it dies after that, it's not my problem. And I completely agree that if you find yourself in a situation which somebody else has imposed on you, then what you would want to do is, and you now have someone who's dependent on you, what you would want to do is possibly transfer that responsibility to someone else as soon as possible. And I don't have any problem with that. Now, exactly, the problem with this example was that someone else had dumped a child onto your boat. But to make it a more realistic analogy, really, it's as if you'd taken a child and put them on board, and you were days from shore and they're completely dependent on you. Do you have the right to slit their throat and throw them overboard to the sharks because they're dependent on you? But whether it is you or you who have taken, particularly when it's you who've taken the child on board, but even if it was someone else who dumped a child on board, do you have the right to slit their throat? So Christine, sorry, I can't pronounce her last name, it's quite complicated. Christine then replies with, but in the meantime, before someone can relieve you of that obligation, you don't have the right to just cut off. And at that point, Matt Dillahunty jumped back in and said, I don't accept the fact that if you put your child on my front porch, that I'm obligated in any way to take care of it. And again, yes, you're not obligated to take care of it if someone puts a child onto your front porch, and that is correct. But Christine again says, but you are obligated to not actively kill it. But you are obligated to not kill it. And this was the mic drop moment of the whole debate, I found. Matt Dillahunty said, this is where the line gets drawn. Yes, you are obligated to not kill them. I don't know, what more can we say? Well, that's the thing. If someone is dependent on you, do you have the right to kill them? If they happen to be dependent on you and it was through no fault of your own, yes, I think, you can certainly attempt to transfer that responsibility to someone who does want to take that obligation. But do you have but does it give you the right to actively go and kill someone who is dependent on you? And this is, is pretty much the biggest difference between adults and children, is the fact that children are dependent. It's not that they choose to be dependent, but they are. They're dependent on adults for food, water, clothing, shelter. And it's not that they've chosen to be in that position. They don't have any choice. It's either that, either they depend on you or they die. And so this is why we have this massive, yes, we are in a sense empowered. We have massive amounts of power over children because they are so dependent on us. And because we have this much power, we also have a lot of responsibility that we could take. But the responsibility isn't deciding life or death and playing around and toying around with children and basically saying you will die and you will live. It's about saying I'm the one who caused you to be here. What am I going to do about it? You are completely dependent on me. How should I react? Am I going to treat you with violence? Because you find yourself under my power? Or should I be there to nurture you? Give you clothing, give you food, give you shelter, until such a time as you can become independent. And there's a thing that children do strive to be independent. It's not like they want to forever be breastfed. It's not like they forever want to be coddled all the time. And you look at children, and one of their big major desires is to not be so helpless. They understand that they are helpless, and they want to become independent. And we should be encouraging them to become independent and allowing them to take those steps into independency. But just simply because we have power doesn't give us the right to be able to kill.